On Holy Wednesday evening, the Church conducts the Matin service for Holy Thursday. This service commemorates four very important events. A few important details must be shared first so that we may understand the events that are taking place. The feast day of Passover, or Pascha in Greek, is the most sacred holiday of the Jews. According to the law, the Jewish people ate the paschal lamb on the evening of the 14th day of Nisan. A vast amount of pilgrims arrived into Jerusalem to celebrate Pascha. It is also very important to note that for the Jews, the day began the evening before. For practical reasons, such as to accommodate these pilgrims, especially the poorest, that could not find lodgings and that could not fulfill the requirements demanded by the law, they were allowed to eat their meal on the evening of the 13th day of Nisan, which is considered to be the actual day of the 14th of Nisan. The members of the Sanhedrin, on the other hand, were wealthy enough to celebrate at the appropriate time prescribed by the law. Because of their wealth, they also had the capability to appear more righteous than the rest of their fellow countrymen. Because he had no place to stay in Jerusalem, and because he was to be sacrificed on the actual day that the paschal lamb was to be killed, Jesus sent his two most beloved and trustworthy disciples, Peter and John, to go find the place where they would have their supper and then prepare the paschal meal itself. These preparations took place between the 6th and the 9th hour, that is between noon and 3 p.m. our time, and the supper itself began at around 5 p.m., as was the custom at the time. This tradition was reflected in the times that the Holy Thursday services would take place. For example, the Vesperal Divine Liturgy, which is held on Holy Thursday morning for pastoral reasons, was originally served after 5 p.m. on the same day. The first important event that the Church commemorates is Christ's washing of the feet of his disciples. Once everyone had arrived at the lofty upper room that was offered by a sympathizer of Christ, and everyone was seated, the disciples were arguing who was the first among them. Jesus got up, took out his outer garment, wrapped a towel around his waist, and began washing his disciples' feet, so that he can be for them an example of humility. It is said, according to tradition, that the first apostle whose feet he washed was Judas Iscariot. Jesus then washed the feet of Peter, who didn't consent at first. His master told him that if he didn't allow him to wash his feet, he would not have any part with him. Only then did Peter acquiesce. Jesus then continued washing the feet of the rest of his disciples. After doing this, all of them proceeded to partake of the customary Passover meal. Once that was finished, the second important event took place. Jesus established the mystery, or the sacrament of the Holy Eucharist. He took bread, gave thanks, blessed it, sanctified it, broke it, and then gave it to his disciples. He did the same with a cup of wine, and then he gave it to his disciples. This is the mystery that we celebrate every time we assemble for the Divine Liturgy. The Greek word for church is ekklesia, which means the calling to assemble. In this particular case, the calling to assemble is extended to all the initiated faithful that have been baptized and chrismated. This idea of ekklesia is also reflected in the term liturgy, which means the work of the people, and not only the work of the priest and the chanters. Every time we gather as ekklesia, all of us are called to be participants in the mystery or sacrament of the church, and not just mere spectators. Throughout their Paschal Supper, Jesus also hinted that he was going to be betrayed by one of them. He also pointed him out to John. The betrayer would be the one that would dip his hand in the dish at the same time as Jesus would. After having done so, Judas Iscariot left and went to the Sanhedrin. Jesus, on the other hand, started giving his final teachings and instructions to the remaining disciples, and then proceeded to the Mount of Olives. At the foot of the mount, near the Kedron brook, there was a garden called Gethsemane. It was there that the third important event took place. Jesus asked his disciples, save Peter, James, and John, whom he took with him, to stay put while he went to pray. He took these 3 disciples a little further, and there, being in distress, he began agonizing in front of them. He urged them to stay awake, and he went a stone throw away to pray alone. His anguish was so intense that his sweat became like great drops of blood. 3 times Jesus went to see his 3 disciples, and 3 times he found them sleeping. The fourth important event is the actual betrayal of Judas. Once Jesus finished his agonizing prayer, Judas appeared with a group of soldiers, went up to his master, and betrayed him with a kiss. When the soldiers put their hands on Jesus, all the disciples, except Peter and John, were scattered. Peter, being hot-blooded, took a sword he had in his possession and attacked a servant of the archpriest by the name of Malchus. Jesus healed the wounded servant and was taken prisoner. He was brought to the house of Annas, the father-in-law of Caiaphas. The epilogue of the story is meant to prepare us for the events that will take place on Holy Friday. That is why we are told that all the members of the Sanhedrin that were enemies of Jesus gathered at Annas' house. Meanwhile, John the Evangelist, who was the youngest of Jesus' disciples and who knew the high priest, was allowed to go inside with Jesus. Peter was with the young man, but he was only able to go as far as the courtyard. Jesus was illegally questioned, falsely accused by false witnesses, and compelled by the high priest to say if he truly was the Christ. Upon saying the truth of who he was found worthy of death for blasphemy. Those present spat on Jesus, smiting and mocking him until morning. In the courtyard, Peter was recognized as being a disciple of Jesus, but denied his master 3 times. Once he heard the cock crow, he left and wept bitterly for his denial. Then the Sanhedrin pronounced the death sentence, and they took him bound straight to Pilate.